Nathan Segal definitely has a story to share with his transformational life in terms of how he's overcome so many obstacles. He has taken every single challenge he's gone through and transformed his pain into purpose as a visual artist. You see, Nathan's purpose is to create art that brings beauty to the world, and each of his pieces is designed to inspire and create a sense of connection so that those viewing his art not just feel it or see it, but they are uplifted by it. They are awakened inside of themselves, something timeless, and it's a reminder of the extraordinary gift of being alive. And Nathan certainly has so much for which he is grateful for, and his life is a testament of that. And so, with that being said, welcome to the Power Transformation Podcast. I am your host, Alethea Felton, and I thank you for joining me today. If you have not done so already, go ahead and follow and subscribe to the Power Transformation Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and spread the word. Share this episode with at least 5 people that you know. We are still in the top 5% of podcasts globally, and we want to keep that momentum going. And Nathan is one of hundreds of guests that I've had who have shared their stories of overcoming obstacles and being of greater good for the world. And I want to jump right into Nathan's episode. So let's go ahead and say our positive affirmation. I'll say it once and you repeat it. I use my artistic and creative talents positively to transform my community and the world around me. It is such an esteemed honor today to have Nathan Segal here as my guest on the Power Transformation Podcast. He is an artist extraordinaire. He is so layered with his experiences. He is also so creative in his thinking, very, very clear in his arguments. And I say arguments in a good way because he has so many perspectives on a lot of different things. I have had some rich conversations with him. And Nathan, welcome to the Power Transformation Podcast.
Thank you.
I am so honored to have you here today. And the audience heard a little bit about you prior to us starting this actual interview, but I want to jump right into this. And I always like to start with a lighthearted icebreaker question. And so, Nathan, this is my question for you. Spring, summer, fall, winter. What is your favorite season and what makes it your favorite season?
Summer, and simply because it's warm. I'm from Canada and I'm done with cold, but a couple of days ago, I made the decision to stay where I am. And I know that at least for the winter, which is when I don't want to be here because it gets cold, but it's just that certain relationships and stuff have been forming in my life. And one very important one with a local client, and I want to be here to nurture that. And so I finally made the decision to stay here for the winter. So it's just like, well, I'm going to have to invest in some warm clothing and a space heater in the near future.
Exactly. And so I know a little bit about Canada, but definitely not a lot at all. But how much snow do you typically get in your part of Canada? Because, of course, Canada's a country, so I won't make it all like the exact same place. But how much snow do you get on average in terms of where you were raised and brought up?
Oh, where I was raised and brought up, I don't know anymore because it's been a very long time since I was there. But probably, geez, I'm hard pressed to remember, but probably a few feet of snow every winter. I remember a long time ago when I was in tech school, we had a Chinook blow through, and a Chinook is a weather phenomenon that would happen in Calgary, and it would be typically like minus 20 one day, and then the Chinook would come down, which was a temperature inversion. So the warm air would come over the mountains, go down on the plains, push all the cold air up. And so it would go from like minus 20 to plus 16 in about 10 hours.
Oh, my goodness.
And So yeah, and so for Calgarians, there were people sun tanning, even though it was not exactly warm. But for us in Canada, it was nice. I
Mm-hmm.
remember at that time there were huge snowdrifts outside that had been piled up by the road clearing machines, and some of these stacks of snow were like maybe 10 feet high or higher.
Oh,
But
wow.
but I don't remember exactly how much snow we would get there.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, where I did wind up living there, I remember one particular winter we had a major blizzard, like in Vancouver, and we wound up with a couple of feet of snow. And I
Mm.
remember with my girlfriend, we managed to get to within a few hundred feet of where we lived. But at that point,
Mm.
like as we tried to get up the side road and the alley to our place, our car became high centered on the snow, and we couldn't go anywhere.
I
I
can
had to leave
believe.
it. I had to leave it in the middle of the street and just forget about it.
My goodness, I can believe it. And thank you for indulging me with that because I grew up on the East Coast of the United States in southeastern Virginia, right by the North Carolina line. So I'm not near the mountains in terms of where I grew up, but I grew up by the water in the ocean. So we got very little snow. And it's so hilarious because in my hometown area, if it's just a dusting of snow, everything shuts down. And it's so funny to the people who are used to snow. And my mom grew up in Jersey, and she said she had to go to school in feet of snow. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
So that is so interesting. So, one thing that stands out about you, and if a listener is listening, they won't see it, but if they're watching on YouTube, they'll definitely see it is, you know, I love colors. So I love how colorful of a shirt you are wearing. And that is because a part of your identity, in terms of what you do, is you make art. You're an artist. But
Yeah.
the question that I dare ask you, put into your own words, if I were to ask you, who is Nathan Segal, what would you say?
Wouldn't be able to give you a good answer to that because it 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 depends on how you're asking the question.
Hmm.
If you're asking me from a perspective of art or writing or stuff like that, that would be one answer. But if you were asking me from a spiritual perspective, which is where my mind tends to go when somebody asks a question like that, then it would be a completely different answer.
Hmm.
Um, and so I don't know where you're coming from with the question. So once I know
This is
that, then
why
I
I
can answer.
love, yeah. So thank you for that. This is why I love asking this question because this interview is your interview. And so,
Yeah.
therefore, when I ask that question, who is Nathan Segal, or when I ask any guest that, or even if I'm asked, I typically default more to my characteristics and traits. This question is literally so open ended that it's no right or wrong. You answer it the way that you are compelled to do so.
Well, the way that really feels right, if I'm going to be authentic about it, I'd have to come from this spiritual perspective.
Hmm.
And many years ago, I had an experience like I was doing like really tightly focused spiritual practice. And at one point, I remember a lot of people were looking for something called spiritual awakening. And at one point, I remember thinking, that sounds like a good idea. And I just accepted it without realizing what the consequences of that were. But I started to encounter people who would say to me, for you, spiritual awakening is going to happen. Now, the last time that happened, which was about 17 years ago, I think, I was working with a teacher by the name of Stephen Bodian, and is part of the lineage to do with a teacher by the name of Adyashanti.
Mm.
And he was saying to me, spiritually you're in great shape, but psychologically you need a lot of work. And we did a lot of stuff. A lot of what we did was a technique called EMDR, which is one of the tools, if you will, from neurolinguistic programming.
Mhm.
I didn't know that at the time. I found out later. But at one point, he said to me, uh, as we were doing this, which is something the spiritual teachers are not supposed to say, but he said it to me one day. And he said to me, "You're done. For you, awakening is going to happen." And I remember telling him about it later when I actually met him. And he said, "I don't remember saying that." And I said, "You did,
Wow.
trust me." But so 2, 3 months later, I forget exactly what happened, but I was walking from my bedroom into the living room, and between one step and another, I felt something turn over and fall out. And if you were to describe it, it was like an egg-shaped size of something.
Mm.
But I felt it turn over and fall out, and then all of a sudden, I just stopped. I looked up, and then I looked inside my head, if that makes any sense, like etherically speaking, and then down into the darkness inside me.
Oh, wow.
And when I did that, um, I saw a candle, what looked like a candle, flare in the darkness. And as I was looking at it, I clearly heard a man's voice say, "I am." And then I just kept looking at this candle, and then it faded away. And then as I kept looking into the darkness, I had this sudden realization. I said, "My God, there's no one here. There is no person." And then a question popped into my mind. Well, if there is no person, who is bound and who is going to be liberated? Which is a major question in spiritual practice. And as I stood there, I realized that this was what a spiritual teacher by the name of Gangaji called the joke. And I started to laugh inside my mind because I understood what was going on.
Mhm.
And so in that moment, I experienced what they call spiritual awakening, and I could actually see everything for the way it actually was, not the way it had been taught.
Interesting.
And so from my perspective, um, and again, using the spiritual terms that came to me, like what I describe of myself is a locus point. But for me, everything, like all of existence, what some people would call the universal, whatever, I refer
Mhm.
to as the one. And so when I look at myself in that way, I realize that there's actually no one here at all, but there's a lot of conditioning and habits and a name for this body that people call Nathan Segal. But from a spiritual perspective, there's actually no one here at all. And when I look out and I look at the world, I realize that there's no one anywhere else either. What I see when I look, if I'm coming from the spiritual, I look at you, what I'm seeing is the one looking through your eyes at me, and the
Mhm.
same one looking at from my eyes through you, and the same thing everywhere. So if I'm coming from that place, that's who I really am, and whatever else is happening is just this dance, if you will, of life. And
Mhm.
there was another major thing which I did a while ago, which was part of the spiritual journey, and there was a teacher by the name of Dr. David Hawkins, and he wrote a book called Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender. And about a month ago, I went through, and I'd known this 10 years ago, but my mind wouldn't let me do it. It kept giving me all these excuses.
Mhm.
One day, I completely surrendered everything of who I am, my personality, my likes, my dislikes, my plans, everything to God directly. And when I did that, everything changed and improved. And I
Mhm.
started to see stuff that I'd never seen before. And then all sorts of things changed in a major way. And so, in terms of how I live, it's from the surrendered state. And
Mhm.
Dr. Hawkins, in his book, was talking about that every day, whatever happens, conflicts, problems, issues, you surrender everything on an ongoing basis. And when you do that, a lot of things in your life change dramatically, as they have for me.
Mm.
So this is not the
Wow.
conversation I expected to be having with you, but you
That's
have.
okay. No, because I'm gonna bring it back because it leads me. I've been listening very carefully to you, in order to make this transition, because to me, based on some things that I know about you from what you've shared with me that the audience will learn, I think that so much of it makes sense, especially in your situation, talking about how with this spiritual awakening, your life changed and your
Oh,
life,
huge.
Nathan, has had so many different changes, including something, and let me clarify with the audience, was that early on when I asked you what was it like for you growing up, and you said, well, I really don't remember, it was so long ago. But that also leads into part of your story that is so fascinating to me in thinking about the concept of this show, the Power Transformation podcast, and stories of
Mm.
overcoming challenges, resilience. But you had something happen directly to you that is called, and I have my note here, dissociative amnesia, which is
That is-
quite fascinating. Nathan, take us on that journey as far as you can to, first of all, tell us what exactly that was and what caused that dissociative amnesia and how did your life change with it?
Well, okay. Dissociative amnesia is where you lose parts of your memory. And unlike other forms of amnesia, rather, that
Mhm.
might be caused by injury or brain injury or something like that, this one is, from what I understand at least, is caused by trauma.
Mm,
And for me, I've had, God, 7 or 8 episodes of it over the years, and it started when I was 10. Um, Now, as for what the root cause of it is,
mhm,
I don't really know for sure, although some bits of it have to do with getting overwhelmed
mhm,
mentally by things in my environment that would trigger it. Um, when I look back at my past, it took me a very long time to get to the point where I could be honest about one very important thing. I'd been working with a coach a few years ago, and he kept asking me, "Have you been sexually abused?" And I
mm,
couldn't speak the words. I was using something that actually did happen, words that I don't know how I discovered this, but there was a phrase called parentified children and emotional incest. That specifically is what my mother did to me. But my coach was saying to me, he didn't say it in these words, but he said to me, it's like you're kind of covering this up. What
mhm,
really happened, the larger picture, this comes under the umbrella category, if you will, of sexual abuse. And it took me a very long time to be able to admit it. And so when I look back to do with the amnesia, yeah, sexual abuse, but also abuse. And then a couple of major realizations that happened along the way, one which happened about 8 years ago when my mother died. I was a part of a group, we were talking about PTSD a lot, but the word that kept coming up is narcissism. And I didn't want to
mhm,
look at it at all. I avoided it every chance I got. But after my mother died, a friend sent me a video I should watch by a guy by the name of Ross Rosenberg. And it was about covert narcissism. And I watched the video and I remember looking at it. And after the video, I went like this, oh shit, because
mm,
I instantly recognized my mother as a covert narcissist, my late mother, and my father, and my younger brother, along with what I consider to be psychopathy in the case of my brother, because of something that happened. And so, and then not all that long ago, winding up in a relationship with a woman where there were all these things wrong, but I couldn't understand what it was. And it wasn't until the last couple of months and then getting out that I discovered that she's actually a narcissist. And someone would say, well, why would you attract someone like that? And the answer was, it took me a while to figure it out. But the answer was because she did things that I'd never seen before. I grew up in a family of narcissism. So my parents never did the stuff that my ex did. And I'd never seen this before. So it threw me off balance. So she was able to fool me with a lot of stuff. But anyway, getting back to your question, My first episode of amnesia happened when I got humiliated in front of my grade five class.
Okay.
I, like at the time, I was a really bright kid, but I didn't know that. I was just a kid, right? I was 10 years old. I was in grade five. And for fun, I was reading my older sister's grade 10 textbooks, and I understood everything I read.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave a report on amoebas to my class, and they humiliated me and they called me a liar and that I made it up. The teacher didn't do anything to stop it. And it triggered a massive shock inside me where I forgot about the episode, but I also developed the belief that I'm stupid. And after that, I failed my way through school.
Mm.
For years, I had to repeat multiple courses. And then at one point, I was 23 years old. I was standing in the locker room of a tech school that I was at, and we were doing some pretty complex stuff. And I remember standing there and thinking about what we were doing and realizing that I was doing fairly well with some of it. And as I stood there, I thought, where did I ever get the idea that I was stupid? And then I
Mm-hmm.
remembered grade five, the humiliation and everything. It played in my mind for a few seconds, then it went away. And then after that, my marks took off, and I wound up making a discovery in chemistry, which is, of course, I failed in high school. But I discovered something. It was, and I call it the key to chemistry. I never shared it with anyone. But after that, my experience of chemistry took off. What was once
Mm-hmm.
difficult became fun. I could unlock any chemical formula in chemistry because I had the key, and I never shared it with anyone. And my marks just took off. And I remember at the end of the year, I wound up with the second highest mark on the final exam, and I aced chemistry. Now, in that particular school, in order to get an A, you had to score 85 and above, and I got to 87.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, chemistry became fun to me. But in
Yeah.
terms of the amnesia, it happened multiple times over the years, always due to trauma. And there was one notable time I was like 29 or something, and I went to counseling, and I revealed the sexual abuse between me and my mother. And then after that, I walked out of the office, walked down a flight of stairs, opened the door to get on the sidewalk. And as I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I suddenly realized I couldn't remember who I was.
Mm.
I
Just
didn't.
that instant. Wow.
Well, it was more than that. It was just,
Okay.
I couldn't remember my name. I didn't know
Mm.
where I was. I didn't know what city I was in. And I remember being terrified, and I reached into my pocket and I pulled out my keys and suddenly remembered I was driving a uh, black Dodge van, managed to find it, started driving, somehow remembered how to get home. And I got home, but I was a mess for the rest of the day. Now, what had happened to me was the very worst form of dissociative amnesia. It's called
Hmm.
dissociative fugue. And people who encounter that kind of a trauma have a tendency to forget their entire history, their name, everything. They can't remember anything. And in the more extreme cases, they literally move to another place, change their name, start over, and they might be found 10 years later with no memory of their history or
Hmm.
anybody. And even if people that they used to know intimately, like family or girlfriends, were to stand in front of them, they can't remember who they are.
That is
Nothing.
quite fascinating.
Yeah.
And in terms of starting with those bouts as a child, Nathan, was it more like you forgot certain aspects, more like blackouts of things,
Yeah.
but not the full memory loss? Is
Not the
that what
full
it
memory.
was similar to? Like having
Yeah.
blackouts in a way?
Well, it wasn't a blackout, but I was unable to remember parts of my history.
Okay.
And the last time it happened was about 16 years ago. And it was the result of making several major bad decisions in my
Hmm.
life. And one of them culminated with a vicious attack by the IRS of Canada.
Hmm.
And it triggered amnesia. Now, at the time when it happened, I knew I had amnesia. And I managed to recover from it 2 years later when I watched a video by a guy by the name of Robert Smith. I know it sounds corny, the name, but he was a pioneer in something called faster EFT. And he talked about amnesia leaving clues. And so I followed his instructions and I managed to recover like the next day at a farmer's market. But
Mm.
and so that helped. But what I didn't know is that the trauma was so severe that it actually triggered 2 episodes of dissociative amnesia. So one of them I recovered from 2 years later, but the other one affected me for 14 years.
My
I lost a
goodness.
huge amount of my memory. I lost my direction. I lost so many things. About the only thing that stayed with me was an incredible anger, and I didn't know why, and I couldn't access it. And the worst part about that form of amnesia, quite often, at least for me, is that you don't know that you're suffering from amnesia. You don't know, you know something's
Hmm.
wrong, but you can't figure it out.
Yeah.
Drove me straight into poverty. I became homeless for a while. I still couldn't recover what was going on. And then I started finding my way back through certain things. And there was one night where I'd had a session with a coach, and I was also studying, God, what is it? Silva mind control technique.
Okay.
And as I was sitting in my chair, I felt something come back into my mind, these thoughts. And I remember going, oh God, no, not again.
Mm.
And that was when I started to recover from that episode of amnesia. But unlike all the episodes I'd had before, I didn't recover all my memories right away. I recovered it in chunks over two
Hmm.
years. And
Wow.
and yeah.
Quick, quick question. So, because you are an artist, this begs the question is where did the art come into play? Is that something that you never lost? Was it always
Well,
there?
it was something that was always there. It was something else
Mm,
that was not really affected by this. I mean, the artistic side started when I was maybe 7 or 8, when somebody gave me a
mm-hmm,
model airplane as a like a plastic model kit to build. And so that's where the journey of art started. But that part of it seemed to be unaffected now that I think
wow.
about it. Um, I mean, but I lost the ability. Well, actually, it's not entirely true. Like during that time, I lost the ability to do certain things. I
Mm-hmm,
lost my a lot of memories. I could do stuff, but I would have all these fragments and chunks and stuff of what was
mm-hmm,
going on. And it
mm-hmm,
wasn't until my memories really started to come back that I could finally remember what I was doing and where I was, and it allowed me to gradually change direction. Because around the same time that I lost my memories was when I became really sick of freelance writing and everything to do with it, and that was largely to do with getting cheated in a major way on a contract. And but then also the career of writing changed for me, where I could not make the kind of living that I really wanted to make.
mm-hmm,
And it's only in the last little while that I've been piecing together a whole bunch of stuff and starting to realize how I can resurrect things, but not to do it the way I did before, but in a different way that will work better and give me the flexibility and just all these pieces. Now, I'm not going to call them memories because they're not that. They're pieces of information that have come into my life from a variety of places.
okay.
And I've just been sorting it out and figuring out, how do I make this work so I can live my life more on my terms now, but not go back to this, but still use all of where I came from. And it's like another major piece happened only a few days ago. I
Mm,
finally realized, oh, I need to reinvent myself using like a platform called School and
mm-hmm,
several other things. And I'm going to be like, I'm still going to be doing in some ways what I did before, but in this, instead of working for magazines, which I did for 25 years and stuff like that, I'm going to be running the whole show. So I'm going to have
mm-hmm,
a presence which would be like a magazine in some ways, but many more other things, and a group and a mastermind, and God only knows what else. But
Hmm.
all these things that will happen, but they will all happen under one roof. So everything's
Yeah.
it's all together.
Under one platform or
Yeah.
umbrella, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
Now, when you went through this last bout,
Yeah.
where you experienced homelessness and just a gamut of other issues, take
Yeah.
us to how you were processing all of this emotionally, and how you decided to say, okay, and I don't know, maybe it wasn't even a decision. What I'm trying to get to is, what was that turning point for you where you knew that you were trying to put some of the pieces together, but how did you transition from homelessness into having stability again, income again? And how were you processing all of this emotionally?
Um, I didn't know I was suffering from amnesia at the time,
Mm,
so I couldn't access any of that. Homelessness, I wound up meeting somebody who actually helped me get off the street, but it also turned out
wow.
that the guy who helped me was also manipulating me.
Mm-hmm.
And he tried to get me involved in something. And had I done it, I would have wound up in a lot of trouble. But luckily,
Okay.
I was around this person for a while. But then at one point, I had a break. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember sitting alone by myself, alone in a Starbucks one evening. And as I was sitting there, a thought came into my head, which is, I really don't like Charles. And it stopped me in my tracks, and I started thinking about what was going on. And then I realized that he was trying to manipulate me into something. And had I fallen for it, I would have wound up in trouble. It was precisely at that same time that only a couple of days before, where he had helped me to a point where I was able to, like at that point, I was still homeless. And when I was sitting in the chair, I was still homeless at that point
Mm-hmm.
and sleeping in my car. And I'd been doing that on and off for 3 months. But he helped me to the point where I learned about a system in Canada, which is welfare. And I managed to gain access to it, and I
Mm-hmm.
got the help that I needed, but I hadn't received the money yet. And it was like a Saturday or a Sunday night Sunday night, I think, when all this was happening. And when I realized how he was trying to manipulate me, the very next day I contacted the agent and I said, I need to make a change. Don't give me this, because this thing isn't going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was being manipulated at that point, and I stopped everything from going forward because I knew I needed to. And then I did some more stuff, and then I found a situation where I could get off the street very quickly.
Wow.
But this guy was trying to manipulate me. Ooh, boy, was he furious when he found out. And he tried to manipulate me again, but by that point, I knew what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally did get off the street, a very important thing happened. I went to a meeting of a group in Victoria called the Yes Group, which stands for Young Entrepreneurial Society.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a guy there who was giving a talk, which was all about psychopaths. And the lights went off big time in my head. And I knew for certainty that this guy that I'm calling Charles was a psychopath. And thank God I didn't fall for it, because he could have hurt me severely if I had. So there were all these things, but I was still operating under amnesia. I still didn't have everything. It wasn't until that one night of sitting in front of my computer, like almost 2 years ago, that my memories started to come back. But there were other things that I was doing at the time, like I was having all these problems, major problems to do with writing and this and that. And there was a guy I encountered. His name is Damon Cart, and he's a neurolinguistic programming teacher. And he learned a method from his teacher. But I was watching his videos, and one of them hit me like a very hard one night, and it had to do with the word if.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, that was the same word, now that I think about it, was in that contract all the years ago when I got screwed. It was the word if. But in the context of, what if everything I've been thinking about is wrong? And so I started asking those questions, and that's what started to bring me out of it. Like at the time, I didn't know I was dealing with amnesia, but it started to bring me out of it, different things. And, but then I just started getting chunks back. And as I got the chunks back, I began to remember what happened to me. And I
Mhm.
finally got to a point where I'd recovered all of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is absolutely extraordinary because that is not something that is easy. And the fact that you are where you are now and that you can speak about it, and it does make sense in terms of the journey, how extensive that it was. And so let's take us now to this place and space of where you are now, Nathan, with your business, with your life, etc. How has your life transformed since you coming out of this most recent episode?
Well, there are a couple of things. Like almost a year ago at this time, I wound up encountering a guy by the name of Dr. Philip Agros in a marketing group, and his thing was self-sabotage. And I wound up getting into this group with him, and as a result, a lot of things changed, and I give him
Mhm.
full credit for that. Um, to learning about the sabotage, and one of the things he said to me, and another friend of mine who's an NLP trainer in Australia, um, almost a year ago at this time, I received what I consider the single most important teaching of my entire adult life. So the person who shared it with me is a guy by the name of Rick Schnabel. Now, one of the major problems that I'd had all the way through my life is I come from the background of Judaism. Now,
Mhm.
one of the major problems that actually is kind of multi-layered, but it has to do with the what they refer to as the Holocaust and the 6 million who died in Nazi Germany and so on. I was deeply troubled about all of that, like very, very deeply troubled. But the other thing that also bothered me enormously was the victim mentality to do with Jewish people, which I knew that I had. And I really wanted to overcome it, but I kept falling back into it. And I didn't know why, and I didn't know what to do about it. And then I wound up having this meeting with my friend Rick, who metaphorically pinned me against the wall and told me what was wrong with my life and how to fix it. And essentially, he gave me the teaching of 100% responsibility for your life, which I'd heard years before, but I didn't understand it. And he explained it to me in detail. And then he said to me, everything in your life, you're responsible for this, like for all the shitty decisions, all the major mistakes. And and when he said it, it was rather painful, to be
Mhm.
blunt, but I got it. And then I started looking backwards into my life and all these major problems like that contract and several other things that got me into trouble. And I realized that I was the root cause of this. And I also realized why. And it just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper. And then I had another conversation with Rick at one point. It was an offer of coaching. And we wound up talking about this thing about the 100% responsibility for your life. And he said to me, one thing that's really clear to me is that you really get this. You really understand it. And it's true, I did. And it was a major, very important change, very positive. But he said, I really like what you're saying, and I'd like to interview you for another video I'm doing. And I said, okay, cool. When do you want to do the interview? And he said, how about now? So we
Mm.
did the interview, and then he created another video and so on and on. But that was another major piece of what happened
Yeah.
because when you come from the place of 100% responsibility, the victim mindset vanishes. You can't when you accept full responsibility, the victim stuff goes poof, it's gone. And you can't blame anybody else for what's happened. You realize, oh my God, I'm the root cause of this.
Mm.
I was sleepwalking through life in a certain way. I was being a certain way. And I knew at the time that I wasn't taking responsibility, that I wasn't doing certain things, that I was getting inklings that I should be doing.
Mhm.
And I was like glossing it over and hoping things would be okay. And I made a lot of major mistakes, which
Mhm.
created all these events in my life.
Wow.
So it was a result of those major mistakes that set the stage for the trauma that created the amnesia. But if I look back on it, the root cause was all my mistakes, which created the stage for this. And so I can't blame anybody else for the amnesia. I unknowingly set it up for myself, which triggered all this stuff. And then I finally came out the other side of it. But again, the thing is 100% responsibility.
Mhm.
And I remember it's like going, shit, I
Mm.
did this. This is my fault.
Looking at yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Looking
At
at
that point,
yourself. Mhm.
yeah, at that point, I knew I couldn't blame anybody for it. I knew it was my fault through lack of attention, not doing my due diligence, not asking the right questions. I knew about these things peripherally, but I didn't pay attention. And because I didn't pay attention, it set the stage for all these problems. So part of what I've been doing since I came out of that is being more intentional and being a lot more careful so
Mhm.
that hopefully I don't make the same mistakes that I did back then.
Mm. And that's really another level because the whole concept of that 100% responsibility,
Hmm.
not everyone is there and not
Oh
everyone
no.
will get there, but it takes a lot of introspection to that. I typically live by that because even with me and the challenges I have that in terms of the health, for example, that I was born with, while I can't control being born with it, I can control my stress. I can control going to my doctor's appointments. I
Yeah.
can control resting when I need to. So I can control that to an
Yeah.
extent, but I had to take a hard look at my life in certain areas of relationships, for example. What was I allowing that wasn't for my greater good? So I couldn't blame him when I was doing certain things or
Yeah.
allowing myself to be treated in a particular way. So I had to be responsible. And until I came to that conclusion, then it made room for me to meet the man that I'm with now who treats me wonderfully. But it's because I had to come to the responsibility. That's just one example of it. And so that right there, I actually resonate with that concept of the 100% responsibility piece. It is something that can be very uncomfortable, but I had to get therapy for my own issues and things of that nature, and it's a daily practice. And I could talk to you all day, but I know that we have to come to a close here. And I wanted to
Sure.
touch some on the fact that we had mentioned how the art has always been a part of your life, and I've been so blessed to even get a beautiful butterfly color um what's the word? Coloring book from you. I was going to say coloring book from
Yeah.
you. And what I love about your artwork, from even some of the samples you had sent me prior, it is the attention to detail with everything that you do. And so, what I wanted to ask you here is, how has art played a part in this healing journey of yours, or has it even?
Well, not entirely sure. It's just been a
Mm,
part of what I've been doing for a very long
yeah.
time. It's
Mhm,
and it's evolved a lot over the years.
mhm,
I mean, even the stuff that you've been looking at with the butterflies, I can't claim credit for the detail of it because
mhm.
that was being created by the AI programs I was using.
Uh-huh.
The only thing I can claim credit for are the prompts because it took me quite a
Yes,
while to
exactly.
figure out how to speak to the software in such a way that it would create something closer to my vision. Now, that coloring book was my first attempt, but later I signed up for another program called Midjourney, and then I did research into prompts. And when I started to use them and change them a little bit, I got the results I wanted almost instantly.
Mm.
And then I discovered other ways of fixing stuff. But I mean, I don't know, art, it was not entirely a career. It was, and it wasn't even art necessarily. It was, I was building model airplanes, radio controllers. Some people call them remote control, and it's evolved
Mm-hmm.
a lot to where we are now. And it's become extremely advanced and very powerful, and far beyond what it was when I was a kid. That's for sure. But it was just my hobby. It's something I did in the background. But the art stuff evolved over the years. And one of the reasons that it came to where I am now is I remember being really frustrated with, because I was working with all these people and they would tell me what to do in terms of the mechanical execution. I could do that for them. I understood that, but I never understood how things worked. And it wasn't until I went to art school and learned how to see for myself, and then I knew. Now, I had this one friend of mine who kept telling me that, but I avoided it for a very long time. And then when I went to art school, everything changed. Then
Mm.
all of a sudden, all these pieces became integrated, if you will, under one roof. And so now, because of what I learned in art school, I can create virtually anything I want. All I need is the time to learn it, the space, the budget, the instructions, whatever the client wants. And assuming I have all of that, I'll be able to get it done. I'll be able to find a way and to make it work. Whereas before, I had a lot of technical knowledge, but I didn't have the understanding of how to see as an
Mm-hmm.
artist. And that was the one thing that changed everything. And I remember where I was and what I was doing when it happened. But it was the equivalent of instantly learning another language.
Wow.
It's the best way I can describe it.
Yes.
And like there was a thing that I read, and I can't remember who it was about, which artist, but it had to do with something like holding an apple or a tomato.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation with the artist was saying, well, if you give this to me as a piece of food, this is how I see it, like anybody else. Well, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but if you ask me to see it as an artist, then everything changes. And just the simple act of me saying that, I can feel my mind go sideways, and all of a sudden the world of art opens up to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I'm not actually holding an apple, I just have my hand out, uh, all of a sudden my perception changes instantly, and I'm in the mindset of the artist, and I know how to make it work. I know how to represent it. I have all the knowledge I need to turn it into a piece of art, whether that would be on a canvas or something on my screen, or how I'm going to make this work. And it's like an almost an instantaneous shift. And
Mm.
and that's what art did for me. And how do I put it? Like the knowledge of knowing how to see has never left me.
Yeah.
It's
And
something that I can access at will anytime. You ask me about this, and then we talk about that. And if you're saying, well, how does it look when you know how to see it? It's just it's very difficult to describe, but it's a
mm-hmm.
perceptual change.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I could explain it better than,
It's okay because what I'm seeing and the comparison and the parallel that you might not even see is just how you take time to say or write down what you want or put it onto the canvas or whatever piece that you're creating or building.
yeah,
I in a sense liken it to that while you may not see a direct correlation with art and its healing properties on your journey, I see a direct correlation of how even with you living with the past bouts with amnesia of how you've had to put all of those pieces back together. So they almost parallel in a sense. And so art can be healing and therapeutic. And so although it may not have a direct correlation to you, I, as an objective person or an outsider looking in, I see those comparisons in that the fact that art never left you is just absolutely powerful to me. And I also want to encourage people to learn more about how they can support your endeavors. So, do you have a website? Do you have a place where people can go and support your business? Or if they have more inquiries, how can people connect with you?
Yeah, you can go to my website, which is nathansegalart.com. And when you go there, you'll see my portfolio. You'll see some articles that I wrote for magazines over the years. You'll see my speaking page where I want to do more speaking. And yeah, that would be the main place to go.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Power Transformation Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review. It helps us inspire even more listeners. And don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who could use a little power in their transformation. Until next time, keep bouncing back, keep rising, and be good to yourself and to others.